Okay, well, here we are in a new location. And we're going to try to finish Zechariah 13 and do 14 all in one fell swoop. And if we don't get through with it, we may have to pick up the remainder next week. But my intention is to get through Zechariah, the remaining verses of chapter 13 and 14 also. To me, this is the most amazing part of Zechariah. And so we may spend 2 weeks on finishing it up, but I'm going to give it a shot and see if we can get through it.
And that reminds me, next week we will have visitors of Ann Styles from Israel.
Oh.
I think they live in the States or have for some time. They are from Israel. They are Messianic Jews. I don't remember her, but anyway, they are here. They want to visit some classes, and they will. She asked me if I'd be interested.
Oh, so
and I said,
we,
absolutely. We would love to
yeah.
come in. So if you have any questions, they will be
So we
in
may,
class next Sunday, Father's Day.
Father's Day, okay. All right, well, before we get started, let's open with a word of prayer. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, our creator and maker, and the one in whom we live and move and have our being. We're just thankful for the rain that you have provided us and for this time that we can gather together as a group and study these amazing words that you have written and left behind for us here in Zechariah. And we just ask that our faith would be strengthened, and so that, as the preacher remarked this morning, that we can get through those storms of life that you put in front of us. But Lord, we know that there's a calm after the storm, and we're looking forward to that calm period when we can see you coming with the clouds, from the clouds of heaven and in those clouds, and we're looking forward to our salvation then. And we just pray you'll keep us safe and sound until that trumpet sounds. In Jesus' name, amen. Zechariah. We're going to review last week's, and then I got a sign of the times, and then we'll jump. Of course, Zechariah 13, we spent the whole of last week on verse 1, because as I have observed, most commentaries ignore the whole thing. They miss the big point there. It's like the big elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about. And that is, there is going to be a fountain. And that fountain will be flowing from the millennial temple, mainly from the Holy of Holies, literally from the body of the Lord. And after the tribulation and during the millennial kingdom, there will be a fountain flowing in Jerusalem. And those waters will be called Mayim Hayim, which means living waters. And they will be for the healing of nations and the purifying of the land. And the waters come from the rock of our salvation, who is Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach. Salvation, the Anointed One. And these waters are a shadow and a type of the crystal fountain flowing down from the main street of the heavenly city, the New Jerusalem. And so there's a lot there in just that one verse, but if you chase through the scriptures and find these varying passages over in Ezekiel and other places, you find this fountain mentioned in many places. And of course, the big point for us is that it is, in my view, the meaning of the sign of Aquarius, of which the entire world is moving into right now. This particular sign is the pouring out of water, and it's being poured out into the mouth of the fish. And we know that a fish, this astrological sign we are leaving is that of Pisces, which is basically some fish that are tied and tethered by their tails. They are bound. They are in bondage. But then when you move into the sign of Aquarius, the fish is freely drinking all of the living waters. In my view, that's a prefiguring of the church. We're leaving. We get to drink living waters. No more death. So that's Zechariah 13. Any questions there? Of course, everybody believes everything I say, right? I have some land in Florida to show you when we get through there. Oh, absolutely. If you can figure out how to do it. Oh, good guess. Now, those aren't really serving much of a purpose, are they?
Carl, those waters, the fountain that flows, is a literal fountain flowing, or are you talking about a spiritual flowing from the body of Christ?
It's both. It's literal. It's a literal. He is in residence in the Holy of Holies, and from his side comes forth living waters. When he died on the cross, he gave us water, literally from his side, flowed forth both blood and water, and it cleanses us both figuratively and literally. It is, in my view, the meaning of the living waters. So from his side, during the millennial reign, there will be waters coming, and they will be for the healing of nations. And like I said, it prefigures what you see in Revelation.
Will the built over the spring of Gihon, or will that no longer be applicable because the waters are flowing from the side?
I'm glad you asked that question, and I'm going to answer that if you'll give me just a little bit. And I can get into Zechariah 14, because there's some interesting stuff there. Okay, right along, ISIS fighter sees Jesus. An ISIS fighter who reveled in killing Christians. Sound like Paul to you? He now follows Christ after a man in white repeatedly appeared to him in dreams, saying, "You are killing my people," according to a missionary leader. The ISIS fighter, she said, told and I'm not sure who the YWAM leader is, that he had begun having dreams of this man in white who came to him and said, "You are killing my people." And he started to feel really sick and uneasy about what he was doing, and the fighter said that just before he killed one Christian, the man said, "I know you're going to kill me, but I give you my Bible." And the Christian was killed, and this ISIS fighter actually took the Bible and began to read it. Boy, that's interesting. She said that in another dream, Jesus asked the ISIS fighter to follow him, and the ISIS fighter said he was now asking to become a follower of Christ and to be discipled. And so they make reference to the fact that Saul pretty much came along the same way, didn't he? He was a fine killer of Christians until he saw the light. Now there's a little more to the story here. In Joel chapter 2 it says, "And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days will I pour out my spirit. And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood, fire, and pillars of smoke, and the sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon into blood." Remember that one from the tetrads. "Before the great and terrible day of the Lord come, and it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord had said, and in the remnant of the Lord who shall he call." Now, whoever shall call upon the name of the Lord. Now remember, the rock in the desert. Moses was told specifically, strike the rock, out comes water. Then he was told the second time, speak to the rock. Well, he struck it again, and guess what? Well, he didn't get to go to the promised land. You would think, well, why? It seems like a mighty small thing to do, to lose your right to visit the promised land. But God was making a point, and the point is that rock, which gave forth water, was a shadow and a type of Christ himself. He was struck down once on the cross, but a second time, whoever calls on him, speaks to him, will have salvation. And you'll find in Revelation, that one of the final duties of the angelic forces is to fly through the atmosphere and give the gospel story. And it will fulfill this promise here that whoever calls upon the name of the Lord will be delivered. So what we're seeing here, possibly in this ISIS fighter, is the beginnings of the fulfillment of this promise. Your old men will begin to dream dreams. And those dreams may be very well of Jesus. Now, Here's a little known passage over in Isaiah 19. In that day there will be a highway out of Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyria shall come to Egypt, and the Egyptian to Assyria, and the Egyptian shall serve with the Assyrians. And in that day, the day of the Lord, shall Israel be a third with Egypt and with Assyria, even a blessing in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, Blessed be Egypt, my people, Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, mine inheritance. This Assyrian, who's ISIS fighter, I'm assuming he was an Assyrian, but the point is, at some point in time, Assyria, Egypt, Israel, they're all going to get along. And they will be blessed by the Lord himself. And so I believe we're seeing some of that come to pass right now. Even as dark as things are in the Middle East, there's a ray of light that pops up just every now and then.
Where was that recorded?
Where?
This,
You'll find it on the first slide. It's called what? What is it? Why?
WND.com.
Yeah. If you go to WND.com, you'll find this and other articles similar to it.
Oh, World Net Daily?
I read that too, but I can't think of the name.
Yeah, I don't remember. But of course, I don't have much of a mind left anyway.
Somebody said World Net Daily.
Is that what is it?
World Net Daily.
WorldNet Daily? That sounds right. I can't back up or I'll mess up my slides here. So.
Yeah, I saw it, yeah, and I told Carl about it, so it's on there. It says that he kept seeing this vision, and he kept this white angel or whatever kept coming to him in the dream.
It,
Telling me you're killing my people.
it sure reminds you of Saul or Paul.
The YWAM reference in there is youth with a mission.
Oh, is it? Okay. So it's a missionary group then. Okay. Well, here we are. Meanwhile, back in Zechariah 13, in that day there shall be a fountain opened in the house of David, and unto the inhabitants of Jerusalem for sin and for uncleanliness. And of course, we spent all last week on that one verse. So moving right along, and it shall come to pass in that day, remember that is the day of the Lord, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will cut off the names of the idols out of the land, and there shall no more be remembered. And I also will cause the prophets and the unclean spirits to pass out of the land. What is the corollary to that? Well, the corollary is there's unclean spirits there now, right? Well, what did Daniel say? Well, what did he hear? And he was being visited by that angel. Remember the interesting phraseology over there? The angel said, well, it would have been here 3 weeks earlier if it hadn't been for the prince of Persia over there restraining me. Oh, prince of Persia? That's a demon. And the prince of Persia was able to restrain a messenger of God until, I think it was Gabriel came along and helped him out. Or Michael, was it? One of the two. Either Michael or Gabriel came along and helped him out. So there's coming a time when there will be no more unclean spirits in the land. And why might that be?
They will be cast into Gehenna.
Or maybe even farther. I think that's West Texas, isn't it? Yes. Well, we have a promise there that at some point in time, the land is clearly going to be swept clean of these unclean spirits. And I had a point I was trying to make, but it went away. I'll think of it at 10 o'clock tonight. Let's see. And it shall come to pass that when any shall yet prophesy, then his father and mother that begat him shall say unto him, Thou shalt not live, for thou speakest lies in the name of the Lord. And his father and his mother that begat him will thrust him through when he prophesied. Wow, that's pretty scary there, isn't it? I don't know of anybody that runs around prophesying today. Maybe Jim Jones, he was certainly one that was inclined to prophesy. We know what he prophesied was clearly not true, but there's going to be a change in the world for sure. And these spirits that are in the land, they're going to be cleaned out, and people are going to look at iniquity differently than they do today, for sure. Today, if you are a master of deceit and subterfuge, you get elected president. So things are going to change.
Anybody here could be offended.
Somebody-
They wouldn't be here now.
Somebody.
And it shall come to pass in that day that the prophet shall be ashamed every one of his vision, and when he has prophesied, neither shall they wear rough garments to deceive. Apparently that was, if you wanted to act like you were a prophet, remember John the Baptist? He was a rough-looking character, and eat grasshoppers. I don't think I'd want to be a prophet just for that. But at any rate, apparently there were those who went around trying to make believe to some that they were prophets, and of course that will not happen during that period of time. But he shall say, I am no prophet, I am an instrument engineer. Oh, a husbandman, for man taught me to keep cattle from my youth. And one shall say unto him, what are these wounds in thy hands? And he shall answer, those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. Now that was a curious statement. Wounded in his hands and in the house of his friends. Now when I looked at that, my thinking on it was, we're talking about Jesus being nailed to the cross and the wounds in his hands. Well, you can argue that, he was in the land, literally, supposedly of his friends who turned against him. But there is another kind of an obtuse thought, which you find in John 20. And then he said to Thomas, reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither my hand, and thrust into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. And Thomas answered and said unto him, my Lord and my God. And Jesus said unto him, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet believed. There is an argument made by Chuck Missler and some that what was referred to here in this passage is that it was the unbelief that wounded the Lord, because it took someone actually like Thomas to touch his hands before he would believe. And there are some who say, like Chuck Missler, that he was wounded in that sense, that they did not believe. So it was their unbelief that wounded him. I'm not sure I buy it, but I threw it out there for your own thought. Moving right along, awake, O sword, against my shepherd, and against the man that is my fellow, saith the Lord of hosts. Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered, and I will turn my hand upon the little ones. And it shall come to pass that in the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the 3rd part shall be left therein. And I will bring the 3rd part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and try them as gold is tried. And they shall call upon my name, and I will hear them, and I will say, it is my people, and they will say, the Lord is my God. Pretty interesting stuff right here. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd and against the man. The word is gibber, and it means a strong, mighty man. That is my fellow. That word for fellow is kindred. We're talking here about Jesus, who was the shepherd. And you smite the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. That literally happened, did it not? The diaspora, right after Jesus, Titus in 70 AD destroyed the temple, and then around 135 we had the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and Hadrian, who was so mad at the Jews for killing a bunch of his fine Roman soldiers, banished the Jews from the land and tore down everything that looked like Jerusalem and sowed salt in the soil. And they were scattered throughout the entire world. And so this prophecy literally came to pass. But there is a future element here. That in all the land, saith the Lord, 2/3 or 2 parts thereof shall be cut off and die, but the 3rd part shall be left therein. There is coming a future time in which Jerusalem will once again be surrounded. just like Matthew 24 told them. When you see Jerusalem compassed about by the armies of the heathen, then those who are in Judea should flee to the hills. Same story, only this time it's, in my view, the ultimate and final fulfillment of that Matthew 24 prophecy. And the Jews are again going into captivity. But unlike this last time, there are some who have argued that during World War II, 1/3 of all the Jewish people in the world were killed in concentration camps in Europe at the hand of Hitler and his people. There's coming another such event. Israel is again going into captivity. Only this time, 2/3 will be cut off. And the other third would be about to be cut off, except there was divine intervention. And that divine intervention, we know, is the sound of the great trump. And then the angelic forces move throughout the world and gather those who were about to be destroyed. So, more interesting numbers here, if nothing else, in Zechariah. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. So, people are coming in, and they are going to spoil, so they think, Jerusalem, and carry it off. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem for battle. Who is doing the gathering? That's God. There's nothing goes on in the world that somehow God overlooked. I remember when I was growing up and seeing all the divisions of Christianity, and everybody believed something different, and the Catholics were prime offenders in my view because I was taught that. I thought, how did God, he just ran off, he closed his eyes, and look what happened. He needs to be back here under control again because look at this mess this world is in. Well, no, that was his plan. Huh? Yeah, he did. He made me marry a Catholic. Wow. Well, who says God doesn't have a sense of humor? Yeah, he's doing it all the time. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem for battle, and the city shall be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished, and half of the city will go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. And then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. So, God has this whole design. He is going to take his people. Apparently 2/3 of them he's not interested in. They will be cut off. But 1/3, he is interested in that third. And he has plans for them. They are going to, as we will find, if not later today, other studies, that this 1/3 will be coming back to Jerusalem, and they will be responsible for the administration of the entire world during the millennial reign. And the 144,000, though, those are going straight up. They don't have a party in this anymore. Now, we can argue the point as to whether, when we have the wedding feast of the Lamb, which occurs at the end of the tribulation period, whether that's actually here on earth or up in heaven. I kind of tend to believe it's going to be up in heaven. I don't think earth's big enough.
That 144,000, are we at the tribulation, beginning of the tribulation at this point?
This is at the end of the tribulation. When he's gathered all these people, they're fighting Jerusalem, they have overrun the place, they've taken Jews captive, and then...
That's that 3.5 year period.
That's right.
All right, the 144,000 are still in the world.
There's 2 3.5 year periods. Right. There's the first 3.5, and I think at the end of that we have this massive second rapture of people leaving the planet. And then the 144,000 are seen up in the heavenlies somewhere in the midst of the last 3.5 year period. And then at the end of the last 3.5 year period, then the Messiah himself comes down and he does battle. And hold on, we got more from him coming up here in just the next slide, I believe. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof towards the east and towards the west, and there shall be a very great valley. Half of the mountain shall move towards the north, and half of the mountain towards the south. What did the angels say as Jesus left planet Earth after his resurrection? He said, and this is found in Acts chapter 1, and when he had spoken these things, they beheld he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And while they looked steadfastly toward the heaven as he went up, behold, two men stood by them in white apparel. I don't think these were men. I think these were angels. Which also said, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye here gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus which is taken up from you into heaven shall come in like manner as you have seen him go into heaven. And they returned unto Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, or Mount of called Olivet, which was from Jerusalem a Sabbath's day journey. He was on the Mount of Olives. He left up in a cloud. He's coming back the same way. It's recorded in Zechariah 14. When his feet set down, there's going to be an earthquake like no other earthquake. And the whole place is going to split. And to answer your question, I doubt that the Gihon Spring will ever be found again after this. And particularly after we reverses here. But in Matthew 24 it says, And then there will appear a sign of the Son of Man coming from heaven, and all the tribes of earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with great power and glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call. Mega Zalpex, meaning great trumpet. And they will gather his elect from the four winds from one end of heaven to the other. When does that great trumpet blow? Blows on Yom Kippur, during the Nilai, or closing of the gates ceremony. And in Isaiah 27, tells us exactly what's going to happen at that sound of that great trumpet. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall thresh from the channel of the river into the stream of Egypt. That means from the Euphrates to the Nile. And ye shall be gathered one by one, O children of Israel. And it shall come to pass in that day that the great trumpet shall be blown, and they shall come, which were ready to perish in the land of Assyria, and the outcasts in the land of Egypt, and shall worship the Lord in the holy mount at Jerusalem. All of these elements we find there in Zechariah. They are dispersed, 2/3 of them cut off, 1/3 is about to be killed. That process is interrupted by the great trumpet. The angels go, they gather them back to the land, and we'll find in later passages and other prophets that they have the administration duties over planet Earth during this time. Some will be Levites, some will have other responsibilities, but it will be a very prestigious thing just to know a Jew during these days. The whole social order is going to be upset. And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains. Now it says mountains, but it's not. It's mountain, singular. For the valley of the mountain shall reach unto Azel. Yea, ye shall flee as you fled before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah the king of Judah, and the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. So, you asked why I don't think Gihon's going to be an issue again? That whole region is going to be uplifted. And there's going to be an earthquake like no earthquake we've ever seen before. It's interesting because let's read a little more here in Ezekiel 40. And this is talking about when Ezekiel went to, he just got through with 38 and 39, talking about the Gog and the Magog war. And then he says, I'm just going to read the last verse here. It says, In the visions of God brought me into the land of Israel and set me upon a very high mountain, by which was as the frame of a city on the south. Big high mountain, Jerusalem is on this big high mountain. But it's not just a big high mountain. It's the only mountain. In Isaiah chapter 2, now it will come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief, the highest mountain of the mountains, and it will be raised above all the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. And as many peoples as will come to say, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For the law will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Jerusalem is going to be the kingpin, the head, administrative center of the entire world. And that is, Jerusalem is going to be up on a high, high mountain. And in Isaiah 40 it says, let every valley be lifted up and every mountain and hill be made low. In other words, the valleys are going to be filled in, the mountains are going to be knocked down. And the rough ground will become a plain, and the rugged terrain a broad valley. Then the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Planet Earth isn't going to be like it is today. What causes a lot of the winds and so forth on planet Earth today? Well, it's caused by differential heating, right? It's also caused by mountains, which cause the winds to roll up and then come sliding down. If you change the topography of the earth and make it all flat, and then there's some evidence that we're going to see that canopy that was mentioned in the Garden of Eden, that the whole world had a canopy of vapor around it, maybe ice crystals, we're not sure, but whatever it was, it caused planet Earth's temperature not to vary more than 2 or 3 degrees over the course of a day and a night, because there was this canopy that redistributed the heat around the earth. There is a book, I wish I brought it. It's called The Waters Above. And it's a book about a Christian scientist who goes through the argument that there really was waters above, and these waters, when they broke up at the flood, changed everything on planet Earth. Nobody ever really saw the sun directly until those waters were broken up. And then the sun was shown. Otherwise, it hit those clouds or water vapor, whatever it was, and diffused the sun. You didn't have direct UV. So consequently, if you remove the UV from the equation, I can tell you UV burns the crap out of you. This last week, I looked like I was in an ice pick fight, and I didn't have an ice pick. And but that UV burns. Boy, it burns good. And it also disrupts chromosomes and causes mutations and all other sorts of stuff. So it could very well be one of the reasons people lived so long back in those days was because, hey, they didn't have UV bombarding them. So at any rate, the point I was making is planet Earth's going to be different. Don't big mountains, and you can imagine if those plates that slammed together suddenly backed off, you would have one whale of a big earthquake. And that's exactly what Revelation. And they shall bring all your brethren for an offering unto the Lord out of the nations, upon horses and chariots and litters, and upon mules, upon swift beasts, to my holy mountain Jerusalem, saith the Lord, as the children of Israel bring an offering in a clean vessel unto the house of the Lord. So they're going to be gathered, apparently some by angelic forces and others by the people of the earth. I guess they're going to bring them here, as it says, as an offering to the Lord. And it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark, but it shall be in one day, which shall be known to the Lord, not day, not night. But it shall come to pass that in eventime there shall be light, and it shall be in that day that living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them towards the former sea, half of them towards the hinder sea, and in summer and in winter it shall be. Another passage which speaks about this issue of living waters coming out of Jerusalem for the purpose of healing the nations and providing cleansing. Because after all that's going on, the world's going to need cleansing. And the Lord shall be king over all the earth in that day, and there shall be one Lord, and his name one, and all the land shall be turned as a plain from Geba to Rimmon on the south of Jerusalem, and it shall be lifted up. And inhabited in her place from the Benjamin's gate unto the place of the first gate unto the corner gate, and from the tower of Haneel until the king's wine presses. And men shall dwell in it, and there shall be no more utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. This last yellow, Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. I challenge you to find any other place in the scripture that says Jerusalem is safely, securely inhabited, except during the time of the millennial reign. And the reason I say that is, when you're trying to take that round peg of Ezekiel 38 and 39 and push it into a square hole, trying to get it in front of the millennial period, you won't be able to do it. And the reason you won't is because, as it says in 3 places in Ezekiel 38, that Israel will be dwelling securely, without gates and without walls. That forces Ezekiel 38 and 39 fulfillment at the end of the millennial reign. So, to those who are curious as to how that prophecy, the Gog and Magog prophecy, fits in to its fulfillment, you can't get it in front of the millennial reign. It won't fit, I can tell you for sure. So that's one point I wanted to make. And then, as to how big Jerusalem is going to be, Geba is located 5.5 clicks north of Jerusalem, and Rimmon 13 kilometers south. Now, kind of hard to see, but there's Rimmon right there, and there's Geba right up there, and here's Jerusalem here. So you're going to have probably about a 20-kilometer square in that area that's going to be lifted up, or at least the surface area of that mountain and that region is going to be lifted up, and that's where Jerusalem will be, the New Jerusalem, during the millennial reign. So now you know.
Okay, David, will be how far north and
I believe it's 5.5 kilometers north is Geba, and I think 15.5 kilometers south is Rimmon. So there's about 20 clicks in between, and it's roughly a square. So it's a 20-kilometer square area that's going to be lifted up. We don't know what the slope is on the side, but apparently it's enough slope that people can walk up it. But it's going to be a big place. And this shall be the plague, wherewith the Lord shall smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh will consume away while they are standing upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouths. What the world was he talking about?
Living death.
Huh?
It's a living death.
That's right. What I think we're experiencing here is Zechariah's attempt to explain. I think he actually saw what was going on. And what he saw was, we're talking nuclear war here. And if you've ever seen the old pictures, they had cities built up in the desert. And they took pictures of them. They detonated a nuclear explosion to see what would happen to the cities and the structures. And the first thing that happened upon the detonation is the buildings didn't move at all. But what happened was a wave of high-energy particles hit the surface of the buildings, and though they weren't blown down, they were charred completely through. They were hit with such energetic particles that basically, while you were standing, all of the soft tissue of your body would be consumed away before you ever hit the floor. There are pictures of Nagasaki and Hiroshima as people would walk around the town. They would look on the sidewalk, and there would seem to be a shadow of a person there on the ground. Well, that wasn't a shadow. That was the person. They were reduced to their fundamental elements and blown into the ground. So before they ever hit the ground, there wasn't anything left of them other than some carbon residue and maybe a little calcium. This is apparently what's going to happen. These people come and fight Jerusalem. That Battle of Armageddon is going to be fought quite possibly with nuclear weapons. At least that's what you would gather from this description of what these people are going to suffer. And it will come to pass in that day that great tumult for the Lord shall be among them, and they shall lay hold everyone on the hand of his neighbor, and his hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbor, and Judah shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the heathen round about shall be gathered together, gold, silver, apparel, and in great abundance. So Jerusalem, who was being ransacked, well, they end up ransacking the rest of the world, and they get all the good things that they have been denied up to this point. I thought the reason now, like I said, it didn't come to me at 10 o'clock, it just came to me. Why does Satan have title deed to the world? Remember when Jesus was tempted? He went up on a high place in the temple, Satan came to him and said, look at all this. I'll give it to you if you'll just bow down and worship me. The interesting thing there is Jesus never contested his right. He was the owner. The Jews will say the reason he was the owner is because whomever you obey, you are their slave. And when Adam, who had title deed to planet Earth, obeyed Satan, hey, you can eat from that fruit. He lost title deed to planet Earth. And that's when Satan took it over. But fortunately, there is a Jubilee year coming in which all title deeds will be returned to their original owner. And we're looking for that one real soon. And so that's why the world is in such a mess, in my humble opinion. That Satan is in control. His spirits are still in control of the land. And that's why you have never seen peace in the region around Assyria and Babylon, in that region. It's because the prince of Persia is there in control. Won't allow it. That's why Shiites kill Sunnis, Sunnis kill Shiites, and together they kill everybody else. So, moving right along.
Carl, I think that when you talk about what we think of as the atomic would be destroyed, you've got to remember that God has the power to do it. As he demonstrated throughout the Word, that he wanted to end somebody's life or whatever, he could.
He certainly can do it any way he wants, but apparently some of the battles will be nuclear. We find that if you, and maybe I should have brought 2nd Esdras with me, but there is a lot of detail in 2nd Esdras regarding wars between, at the end of the age, between the Arabs and the Persians or the Iranians, in which they are clearly nuclear. It talks about stars falling and huge angry clouds rising up. So, in my view, Iran's going to get the bomb. Saudi Arabia will be right behind because they got all the money in the world anyway. They'll go buy them from Pakistan, if nowhere else, or North Korea. And so there's going to be some nuclear exchanges go on. And this apparently is what's happening here. But we know from other passages, yes. I'm glad you pointed that out to
If
me.
they set off nuclear weapons, isn't that going to set us back in our anti-global warming initiative?
Oh, it's going to warm up everything really good. Now, what is it? What happens when you have a nuclear war? You have global cooling, right? Nuclear winter. Boy, that's going to mess everybody up. Well, in my view, that global warming business is just another attempt by the reigning powers that be to get more control over the population, to relieve you of more of your dollars, to fight something which they can't even define. And I have yet to see anybody claim that they have an equation. And you can just plug in the day, and that equation will tell you what the temperature is going to be any place on Earth during that day. They can't even predict that it was going to rain like cats and dogs this morning, yesterday night, last
They're
night.
calling it climate change.
Yeah, it was climate
Whether
change.
cold or hot or.
Yeah,
but it's just gonna
it's
change.
always climate change.
Well, there'll be a change in the climate.
And people believe all this. They believe all this, and you're an idiot if you disparage them. Ugh. What a world we're in. Are we deceived or what?
We can only hope that the scientists are so bad they're going to mess it up with all these things.
That's a distinct possibility. Okay, where was I before I interrupted myself? Okay,
Also, we're in Maryland Great Abundant.
okay. Is it moving? It's finally moving. It has a mind of its own, just like my wife. And so shall the plagues of the house, and the mule, and the camel, and the ass, and all the beasts shall be in these tents as this plague. In other words, not only going to get the people, it's going to get the animals too. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whosoever does not go up of all the families of earth to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them there shall be no rain. Now, that's a real incentive to show up for the Feast of Tabernacles. And
Which means they will have a, what do you call it? What is it called? Temple, whatever it is, to worship. Or to do, there'll be a temple built in order to have the Feast of Tabernacles. Right.
that's what it's saying here. And you better show up, because if you don't show up, you don't get any rain. And so, very interesting.
They're going to be processing again the old law, which means they will also do the blood sacrifice for their sins and go through the whole ritual process. So it's kind of like they will still be doing the Old Testament process.
You know what? We probably should do Ezekiel next, because that's exactly what Ezekiel says is going to happen. They're not only going to keep tabernacles, they're going to keep at least a couple more of them that are recorded in Ezekiel 40 and chapters beyond. And let me see if I've got some stuff. Let's go on here. And of the family of Egypt that do not go up and come not, that have no rain, there shall be the plague, wherewith the Lord shall smite the heathen that does not come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all nations that do not come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, I think that this may be the driving force as to why we have the Gog and Magog war. This is some sort of speculation, but if you're going to come up and keep the Feast of Tabernacles, you have got to come with a lot of sacrifices. On day one of the feast, it's a 7-day feast, and day one you got to offer 13 oxen. Day 2, 12. Day 3, 11, and so forth, until you have a total of 70 oxen offered over this 7-day period. And not only that, you got to have a bunch of lambs too. Each day you got to have 14 lambs for a total of 98 lambs. 98 lambs is 7 times 7 times 2. This is 7 times 10. And you also have to have...
I'm confused. This is after, this is during the tribulation?
Mm-hmm.
During the millennial
This is
reign?
during the millennial
Wouldn't
reign.
the sacrifice be an affront to God? He's made the holy sacrifice, the complete sacrifice.
Why do we keep Passover? Jesus already died. It's a
Yeah, but a
remembrance.
remembrance. So, but we don't sacrifice the Passover lamb anymore.
Well, maybe we would if we had a temple, but we are a particular group. We are the ecclesia. We are the church. Now, we have a particular modus operandi of worshiping God during this period of time. There is another one coming
And that
during the
doesn't
millennial period.
devalue Christ's sacrifice, the blood of Christ.
What this is doing, the Feast of Sukkot is a shadow of the good times during the millennial period. This sacrifice is not a sacrifice for sins or a sacrifice in place of Messiah. It's just a requirement that God has that people sacrifice this quantity of animals at this particular time. But my feeling is the whole world is going to have to bring their own sacrifices along. And it's very expensive. They're either going to have to bring them along or they're going to have to buy them. And either way, you're going to have wealth transferred to Jerusalem. And don't you know, there's some guy sitting out there in deep, darkest Russia who doesn't want to show up, doesn't want to bring his money, his wealth to Jerusalem, and is getting kind of mad about the whole thing. And then Satan is released, and he goes and prompts this guy, and that's when we have the Gog and Magog war, as they come down again. And to explain why these sacrifices are being kept, don't know. It's just, it was the...
Maybe it's the Jewish people still haven't recognized Jesus Christ, even though he's come back. We know he's come back. They have never seen him go.
Well, they are going to see him when he comes this next time. And
will
then
they accept him at that point?
I believe that they will accept him. Now, why we have all of these sacrifices going on during the millennial reign, we'll have to study Ezekiel 40 and verses and chapters following, because it's there. They're going to keep the Passover, they're going to keep Sukkot, they're going to keep Yom Kippur, and many of these festivals. And I suspect they're going to be keeping them not as, the Passover lamb and looking forward to some event, but as a remembrance of what happened in the past and why they're enjoying what they're enjoying now because of what happened in the past.
So there'll be death during the millennial reign?
As it says in Ezekiel 66, that a child who dies at the age of 100 will thought to have been accursed. So we're talking about still death, but people still living like the age of a tree. Hundreds of years, but no one living 1,000 years, because the promise was back in Genesis that no man would live to be 1,000 years old.
We return with Christ.
Now, there's where you're getting into some interesting complexities. I don't believe so. I believe we are still up in the heavenlies, and we're in training for whatever God has planned for us for eternity. Because, as it says over in Psalms, or is it Psalms or Isaiah, it says that the increase of his government shall be without end. And we are there as kings and priests. These are the leaders. And so he has big plans for us. My suspicion is we're probably going to be still in training for a few thousand years, and who knows what we're going to be doing at that point. And this will continue on until Satan is released, because for 1,000 years people haven't really been tested. And, God is one that he likes to have you demonstrate your faith under stress, if you really believe it. And apparently what happens over that 1,000-year period, even though people are drinking living waters and the Messiah is there, and David, by the way, will be there in body as the priest, the prince actually is what he's called. And even though they can see David, they won't be able to see the Messiah because they can't go into the Holy of Holies. But apparently their faith is never tested. Their children's faith is never tested, but it will be at the Gog and Magog war. And at that point, then at the end of that war, there will be a little season, and then we go off into the eternals. And the New Jerusalem comes down, and we take off on a new heaven and a new earth, and things will be entirely different. But my suspicion is during this period of time, and keeping the Feast of Sukkot, it's going to require a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of expense on the part of the world to bring all of these sacrifices in, and they don't like it. And so at the end of the 1,000-year reign, they come against Jerusalem, and in that day there shall be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and to the pots in the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto the Lord of hosts. And all they that sacrifice shall come and take of them, and see therein, And in that day there shall be no more Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts. That's a merchant. Another word for a merchant. What happened when Jesus caught the merchants in his father's house? He asked them very politely to leave. Yes, he was tipping over their tables and chased them out of there with a whip. He was not very happy about that. Well, that situation will never occur again. Okay, any questions?
Would that also Canaanite be the unbeliever?
I don't think so. I looked up the word, and a synonym for it is merchant. I don't know why they didn't use just the word merchant, because it fits perfectly there. And, you're not going to defile. Literally what they were doing was defiling the house of God, and I think that's the message. There will be no more defiling going on, because God will not allow it. So I think that's the intent. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
I was just gonna say before everybody gets away, I brought pickles. If you come into my house and taste the pickles, if you like them, please take one. If you're not sure, take one. If you don't like them, bring them back. My husband doesn't like them. So, you can take it home. It won't spoil if it's not on ice or pickle. They're made with apple cider vinegar, so they're very tart. But they're good. We like them. So you're welcome to take a jar. I brought them in that.
Not sweet.
No, they're not
They're
sweet.
dill.
Yes, a little goes a long way.
So take one. If you don't like it, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Bring it back next Sunday. We have no problem eating them.
Okay, now next Sunday we're going to have the group from Israel, and I don't know how long they're going to speak.
15 minutes. So
Okay.
maybe half an
And so we'll probably just get started with, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Genesis. We all have the way we've been taught. We've always been taught that, hey, God created the world in 6 days and he rested on the seventh day. And there are people that hold to that literally. And clearly the world makes fun of them. And there's a belief that the flood of Noah was a universal flood. Covered the mountains to 40 cubits or something like that above the tallest mountain. The whole world was flooded. Well, what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to give you an alternative opinion of that. And I'm going to go through the literal Hebrew, and I'll show you why I think there is another answer to that question. And I'm also going to show you how that there were probably men here before Adam was here. And how that jives with what, I'm one of those that doesn't believe that secular history and the Bible are opposed to each other. I think the Bible was right the first time. And the problem is we don't often read the Bible correctly, just as the secular world ignores the Scripture. They try to come up with scientific evidence to support a particular hypothesis here or there, thinking that it runs contrary to the Scripture when they didn't read the Scripture. And of course, most of us haven't read it in really detail, looking at what the Hebrew words literally mean. And you might find something interesting with it. And once again, I use the caveat that what you hear here are the thoughts of a retired instrument engineer. Take them at your own risk.
You don't have to believe it. We don't want you to walk away angry.
It may not be right.
Yeah. But see, they burned off all my old ugly skin, and guess what? There's only old ugly skin underneath it. I'm going to get my money back.